And the problem is that with respect to the 9 justices of the Supreme Court and those 9 individuals alone, there is no place in the law for any proper fact-finding to take place. These justices won't allow themselves to be subjected to honest fact-finding. We really need to fix the rules over there, and that's why this Supreme Court ethics effort that I'm engaged in is so important. They should not be on an island of their own creation where no fact-finding about what the truth is ever gets done.
Rhode Island Senator Sheldon Whitehouse has made a career out of trying to hold the Supreme Court accountable for their blatant corruption and the broken set of rules that create the conditions for their corruption to take hold.
We are trying to fix 3 really simple problems. One is fact-finding. Fact-finding ought not to be an issue in dispute. Every member of government in the United States who is subject to any kind of supervision or ethics requirement, which is everybody, has a process whereby the actual facts are found of what went wrong. Hell, even the President of the United States had to sit for a fact-finding interview about the documents in his garage. It's only 9 people in the entirety of the United States government who think that they have no obligation to do any fact-finding. And that's pretty dangerous, because fact-finding is a really basic elemental proposition of our American judicial process, and it applies everywhere. It makes no sense for the body ultimately responsible for policing proper judicial process in the United States to not allow itself to participate in that most elemental and fundamental task of there being actual fact-finding. The second is a principle so old it's in Latin, for Pete's sake. Nemo judex in sua causa. No one should judge their own case. That's pretty easy to understand. And yet we let these justices, alone in the United States, nobody else, get to be the judges of their own ethics. And obviously they have failed to measure up. And the third issue is transparency, disclosure. We know perfectly well that the justices have failed at their disclosure obligations, and they can't keep their stories straight about meeting their disclosure obligations. We just had Justice Thomas go back into his previous disclosures to correct them and tell the world and the Judicial Conference, which was reviewing this, that his failure to file was an accidental error. It was, quote, inadvertent. But earlier he'd said about the same gifts from the same billionaire, oh, those don't have to be reported. That was personal hospitality from a dear friend. Well, which is it? So the idea that you can trust a Supreme Court justice with no independent review, no fact-finding, each the judge in his own cause, to follow the rules, has been blown to smithereens by the conduct of the Supreme Court justices themselves.
It can't be said enough that we need more fighters like Whitehouse in Congress who actually want to work for the people and make our country better. Supreme Court ethics reform has, become one of the most dire political issues of our time. And we need elected officials like him to speak truth to power from inside the government and wield their political leverage to improve the government and, in turn, all of our lives.
The court has done its best to prevent the American people from fighting back through the democratic process. It's made it harder for ordinary people to vote, while making it easier for billionaires and deep-pocketed special interests to impose their will on the American people with unlimited amounts of dark money. How did we get here? A decades-long scheme led by creepy billionaires and backed by a deluge of dark money captured the court like some crooked 19th century railroad commission. This court capture operation was not cheap. The latest estimate put it at more than $580 million, and that's a minimum. That money flowed in from creepy billionaires, laundered through right-wing front groups like the Federalist Society and Judicial Crisis Network, where the donors, the real donors, could hide their identities behind the front groups doing their dirty work. This dark money funded full-scale campaigns to stack the Supreme Court with justices who would deliver for the billionaires. This has been a long and often lonely fight in the Senate. The big money right-wing apparatus has tried over and over to shut me up. I think I may have a record for hostile Wall Street Journal editorials. And may I tell the Wall Street Journal editorial board, thank you, that is a badge of honor.
White House has it out for the corrupt conservative justices and the dark money networks run by Republican Party mega donors and other wealthy conservatives wanting to secure their influence over our society that bankrolled their rise to arguably the most powerful position in government. Recently, White House has turned his focus to one MAGA justice in particular.
Yes, we drank beer. My friends and I, the boys and girls, yes, we drank beer. I liked beer, still like beer. We drank beer. Sometimes probably had too many beers, and sometimes other people had too many beers. We drank beer. We liked beer.
On behalf of our nation, I want to apologize to Brett and the entire Kavanaugh family for the terrible pain and suffering you have been forced to endure. Our country, a man or a woman, must always be presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty. And with that, I must state that you, sir, under historic scrutiny, were proven innocent. Thank you.
None other than the infamous Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Senator Whitehouse's 6-year-long investigation into Kavanaugh stems from this.
This whole 2-week effort has been a calculated and orchestrated political hit, fueled with apparent pent-up anger about President Trump and the 2016 election, fear that has been unfairly stoked about my judicial record, revenge on behalf of the Clintons, and millions of dollars in money from outside left-wing opposition groups.
When he was credibly accused of sexual assault during his SCOTUS confirmation process, he of course denied all allegations, and Donald Trump himself promised the FBI would use all resources available to investigate and vet these claims. But as Senator Whitehouse uncovered, that wasn't the case at all.
All that talk about the FBI having free reign and able to interview who it wanted was completely false. The entire investigation was completely directed by the White House, with the FBI only as the mere agent of the White House. The second point is that when we were told that this was done by the book, that was highly misleading because for supplemental background investigations, it turns out there is no book. We also found out that the directions were not to pursue corroborating evidence, only direct evidence. And then the Republican senators voting for Kavanaugh all said, oh, look, no corroborating evidence. Well, that was the plan all along. The last thing, the tip line was a complete sham. No tip was ever investigated by the FBI. The Kavanaugh tips were sorted out of regular FBI tip line traffic and delivered to the White House uninvestigated, where they all died, unless they were used to direct the FBI away from any good, meaningful witnesses. And there were plenty of credible tips that came in the FBI tip line. In fact, there were tips that were so credible that the FBI agents flagged them for the White House, saying, hey, you might want to look at this one. But then they waited for the signal from the White House that they could investigate, and they got nothing but dead silence. End result, 0 tips ever investigated.
It turns out the FBI's probe into the Kavanaugh sexual misconduct allegations was tightly controlled by the Trump White House, despite Trump's public claim that the FBI would have free reign. Instead, the FBI was restricted in scope, never allowed to pursue corroborating evidence or investigate the more than 4,500 tips they received. Even worse, they forwarded all these tips directly to the White House without any real investigation. And that's not just sloppy, it is intentional sabotage. You know, this report from the Washington Post is damning. It shows how far some are willing to go to secure political power, even at the expense of justice and truth. Kavanaugh was fast-tracked onto the bench thanks to the White House's grip on the investigation, which buried evidence and silenced victims. The fact that senators were given just 1 hour to review over 1,600 pages of material 2 days before the vote, well, that tells you everything you need to know. It was a sham, and this was the culmination of a decades-long conservative project to take control of the courts. From disregarding credible allegations of sexual abuse, real misconduct, to blocking ethical oversight, Republicans have proven that their only concern is maintaining power, maintaining it no matter the cost.